This is the UEFN base. Here's my title slide.
Nice.
All right. So what is UEFN? UEFN is beginner friendly. Many of the tools are applicable to the engine itself. It's based on Fortnite creative mode. And the differences between UEFN and Fortnite creative mode is UEFN uses an actual editor as opposed to using the established Fortnite controls and everything. It's more comparable to your typical mainstream game engine. There is some of the additions that they added with UEFN are rigging, animation, the verse API, and much more. The verse language itself is comparable to Python, C#, Lua, or if you're programming in Roblox, Luau. And it provides an opportunity to make more graphically intensive games.
What is that PowerPoint, dog?
Most of the scripting in UEFN can be done without coding at all by doing stuff such as animation sequences and using their events and function system that is built into devices. So UEFN has devices, events, and functions. Devices are objects that you place into the world. They visualize what is going on in script, and they are used for scripted events. They all contain settings that are unique to each device that the user can configure. Events are device specific, and they are a reaction to a condition being met. And a function is also device specific, and it's a reaction to the event's action. So if you want to think about it in more simpler terms, the event is the action that is being committed by the player, and the function is the reaction to that event. So we'll go through an example now. For this example, we are going to be using a player marker, and the goal of this is to set it so when the player captures a flag, they will get a player marker attached to them. So the common questions you should ask when making a device, when utilizing a device, are what causes this device to be triggered? What causes it to, if it's an enabling, disabling, how do you enable and disable it? And are there any unforeseen circumstances or circumstances that you can predict that will cause unintended behaviors? So let's go to the player marker. And let's add a capture item spawner. So these are the functions right here. They're listed. This one has enable and disable. And these are the events that you can call from other functions. So when the item is picked up, when the item is dropped, when the item is returned, and when the item is captured. So for the player marker, the goal is to is to attach it to a player when a certain condition is met. So in this case, the condition would be when the item is picked up. So when the player captures the flag, they should receive the player marker. So you can add to attach to player the player marker, or rather the capture item spawner. And then these are all of the events that can cause this to react to it. So when the item is picked up, now the player marker will react to the player picking it up and attach itself to the player. For the other way around, when you want to detach it from the player, when you want to remove that marker, you would go to the same device, the capture item spawner, but instead of doing odd item picked up, you do item dropped. But you also want to account for when they capture the flag. So when the item is captured, you also want it to reset the player marker so that it doesn't remain over them. And another circumstance that you can account for is when the player dies, because if you don't account for that, then the player will retain the marker for the rest of the game. So if you add this elimination manager, it has an on eliminated event. So if you add that as well, now the player will not retain the marker when they are eliminated. And then I can show this somewhat in my level. So if I start this, and I go capture the flag, when the player picks it up, they will receive the marker. But when they drop it, the marker will go away. And the same applies for when they capture it, and also if they die holding the flag. Can also go over animation sequences a bit. So if you want to do something like moving platforms, it's quite simple. Let me add a object to actually do this with. Environment. So it's been a while. Where are the let's just see cube, and then the device that is necessary for this is, I believe, a cinematic sequence. And then you can create a new sequence. And when you open this sequence, it'll open an animation sequencer like you might see in other editors. And then you can just drag the object inside of it, and now you can mess with it. So say I want the cube to start here, I just add that, and then I go to the end, and when it reaches the end, it'll end up right there. And then if I want it to go back, I can add to this sequence. I can get it to work. This starts here. And then it ends right where it started. And then if I set it to autoplay, it'll play when the game starts. It's enabled when the gameplay starts. And there should be a looping as well. Loop playback. So if I push this and update it, the cube should now move. Are there any questions so far?
No, so far no.
Sounds good.
So cinematic sequence is a lot like Unity's own animation system.
Yes. And the nice thing about it is all the collisions and physics and such will update. So you don't have to worry. There are some times where it will bug out because you're not doing it through script and you're doing it through animation, but it should for the most part work.
Hmm.
While that's pushing, I guess I'll go into some verse stuff. So verse is a lot like C sharp, but more so Python, because in C sharp you have to declare the type of variable you are initializing. So like in C sharp, you would say this is a string, or this is a game object, or this is a transform, or something like that. But in verse, that is not necessary. It will assume the type of variable based off the data you give it. So this one is a cinematic sequence, and then I'm telling it to set it to a cinematic sequence device. And this at right here, this is necessary if you want to be able to change these variables in the editor itself. So if I go to this in the outliner, this device right here is the one that's based off that verse script. It now has a cinematic sequence that can be changed. So any of the cinematic sequences I have can be set to this. Same applies for other devices, such as timers. And you can initialize other things, like you can initialize floats, transforms, integers, anything you can really think of, you can initialize, much like programming in any other game language. So like, for example, this one I have this total eliminations counter, which is initialized to 0. If I wanted to be able to change this, I could make it editable. Like if I wanted to change it for debugging purposes. And yeah, besides that, one thing to note is it works similarly to if you want to use events that exist in a device, such as you want to have something happen when the timer reaches 0, you have to subscribe to that event. So if you go to the timer device documentation, there's a success event which is triggered when the timer is activated, or not when it's activated actually. It's when the timer completes or ends with a success. So I subscribe to this event, I get the timer device, I get the success event, and then I subscribe it to another function I created, this on timer ended that is right here. So when the timer is ended, it calls this function. And this function doesn't actually do what it's supposed to do, but this is just an example. Whereas in the editor itself, you don't have to do any subscribing, any coding, or anything. You can just go down here, and this basically acts as a subscription. You saying player marker attached to player, or any other such events and functions you want to occur. There are also triggers in UEFN, similar to other game engines. So if I get a trigger device, actually it's called a volume in UEFN. This volume right here, much like in Unity and Unreal, there's an on-enter and on-exit event. So let's say I want this barrier to be activated when they enter this. I can get the volume and say on enter. It will now enable this device. Instead of having to go through verse and subscribe to the event and then mess with the event through code, you can just do it in the editor itself. If you have programming needs that are pretty simple and work within what already exists. I think that's pretty much it for verse scripting and UEFN. Oh, let me see if the animation's working now. Yeah, so now the cube is moving back and forth. I didn't set its return location to be exact, so it's a bit buggy. But if you just copy paste its initial location down here, so I grab this, copy this, and paste it right here, then it won't have that issue anymore. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Are there any questions or anything you guys want to try out in the editor?
I do have one question. What was your thought process behind this very eccentric presentation?
I have a standard presentation that I made first, and it was really boring making it. And then I asked ChatGPT to make me one, and it didn't know what to do, so I just made it myself.
Wonderful.
I made something that an AI could not make.
I do agree with that.
Reminds me of when I was in high school.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, so
I
I guess
also
we could
made
expect
a level block out in PowerPoint.
fucking. Actually, I might want to say that in the stream.
You're an
'Cause
adult, I would assume.
we're being recorded, so like I don't know, I don't know. Anyways, I'll open the UEFN and see if I can get the component onto the minecart, like the one for the way block I built a couple weeks ago.
Mhm. Yeah, if you want to share your screen, we can watch you do it and help out if needed.
I'll do that. Yeah.
All right.
So it's
That concludes
called.
the presentation portion.
Yeah, so it does look more straightforward to do basic programming overall for UEFN. More approachable than I would think.
Yes.
What language is it?
Verse.
Yeah.
It's like a custom-made language specifically for Fortnite.
Oh, yeah.
Eventually, it'll be integrated into Unreal.
Hmm.
It's generally simple to use, but there's definitely a lot of things you need to know prior, because otherwise you will struggle. Like being able to, like recognizing that every player counts as an individual player, and whenever you want to do something to all players, you have to loop through them in order to change stuff for every player and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But if you're just working with simple objects in UEFN, like just trying to move stuff in script, that kind of stuff is generally pretty simple in verse. But once you start messing with players, it does get a bit more complex.
Alright then, so to the object itself I add, what was it again? So if I wanted to
Um,
the object on the path, what the component do I need?
you add a cinematic sequence device. It's in the devices.
There you go.
What do you
So
see? Oh, go ahead.
the first thing you're going to want to do is group all your objects together, so they'll
I
all move together.
that cylinders are
Oh,
grouped
okay. There's
really,
children.
yeah.
It should be good then.
Well,
What are you gonna ask?
this
So
is
do
putting on
I
like a fortune teller role. Where do you foresee Verse headed in terms of like compared to Roblox and their popularity? Do you see it taking off in the same manner?
Um, probably, but Roblox is just it's much simpler. The language and the game itself is much simpler, and it
Right,
requires much less of the user.
right,
So I
right.
think Roblox will always, at least in the direction that UEFN right now, will remain on top for the
Hmm.
foreseeable future. You can't
yeah that
beat
make
Lua.
yeah that makes sense. Fortnite is still UEFN is still locked to Fortnite's kind of gameplay and controls and such. While Roblox is like much more open.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so do I just attach it to the device, like just pop it on?
No.
Oh,
You can leave it outside of it.
all
And
right.
then what you do is you go to the details panel of that device
Is it-
at the bottom. And then the sequence is what you want.
I want to put it down here. There we go. So you want sequence. Here it is.
And then click on that. Create a new asset.
Oh, uh,
Subtop.
double sequence. Oh,
Oops.
you double sequence. Why not?
And now you double click it, the icon to open it.
Hmm.
And now you can place the minecart inside of there. So in the outliner, grab the minecart and drag it. Yep.
Okay. So that's the starting position. So then I drag over to say here if I wanted to make it go 10 forward.
Oh.
Oh, the first step is Control Z that, and then you want to add the transform.
All right.
There's the plus button next to transform. The smaller one.
Or
So to the right of transform, there's two plus buttons. There's a second one, more to the
that's
right. That one right there.
the keyframe.
Yes, that's how you add the keyframes. When you start moving objects, it'll automatically add the keyframes for you.
Yeah.
if they're on a new spot in the timeline. Usually they do, at least. I guess this time it didn't.
Hmm.
Yeah, so now at the new keyframe.
Then so it's-
And then yeah. Okay. Yeah, I used to do this back when I did animations.
Nice.
nice.
See UEFN as being a good way into Unreal Engine development, or are they too different?
Yeah, I definitely think it is.
Because it has
It's
like
very
90% of the tools, right? Like available to you, the animator, so on and so forth.
yes. Yeah, I would generally agree with that. There isn't much that mm, yeah, I think in terms of learning scripting concepts, learning how to place objects, much like you do in Unreal,
Mm-hmm.
grouping objects, much like you do in Unreal.
Right.
You can learn all the bare bones concepts in UEFN, and almost all of those will apply to Unreal.
Very cool.
Scripting is arguably simpler in some ways in Unreal than it is in UEFN.
Oh, really? Okay. So we have
If you are exclusively using blueprints, then yes.
gotcha. So we have level designers wanting to be a game designer. What would you recommend for them to be using and learning in order to become, into the industry? Because like we know that we've looked it up, and certain positions require scripting, basic scripting knowledge. What would you recommend they dig their hands into? You say UEFN is still the way to go, or would you suggest that they just go straight into that there? Or
Um, I think any engine, not any necessarily any mainstream engine,
Mhm.
any engine that uses Lua or Roblox, I think those are all good options to start out with. And UEFN, they're all good starting points for learning scripting concepts
Okay,
in terms of games.
so it doesn't matter. It's agnostic what you use.
Yeah,
Okay.
because many of the concepts will translate.
Okay. Right. We open up for Q&A.
Sure.
You guys have any questions for Matthew G? What's your favorite part about UEFN? What do you think is like, or if you could say like this is what's gonna set it apart from all the other editors, from all the other like blocks competitors? What do you think it has the advantage of? Just the back end of having all that tooling, or
Um, yeah, most of the benefits come from Unreal itself. Like I would say the biggest upper hand UEFN has over Fortnite or Roblox is nanite technology,
Nanite? Okay, very cool.
because it allows for more quote unquote graphically impressive, visually appealing games with minimal effort
Right.
and minimal optimization efforts needed,
Mm-hmm.
as compared to making something like that in Roblox would be extremely difficult and pretty
Right.
frustrating.
Right. Right. So
Whereas in UEFN, you can add a mesh with 10,000 vertices and it's completely fine with it.
okay. So that's what you think it shines. You're able to create big, expansive worlds with UEFN
Yes.
and then have it be performant. Okay. So this is kind of similar, circling back to just if you had to pick one engine or slash framework in order for our designers to be able to learn and use and Like, what would your preference be? I know it's up to preference, but what would you pick if you had to pick between UEFN, Roblox, so on and so forth? Straight up engines, Unity, Unreal, Godot.
Mm. Yeah, I would just say again, I wouldn't really say there's a best. It depends on the type of games you want to make.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on what types of games you want to design for.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, that's not necessarily true. Like with UEFN, it comes off that it is targeted for multiplayer experiences, but you can also create single player experiences in it.
Right, right. You have any advice or tips for people looking to get into UEFN or maybe an editor of their choice? Some like hard learned lessons.
Um, my advice for people who want to get in design is watch video tutorials on utilizing navigating the viewport and using the content drawer, maybe some organizational stuff as well inside the editor.
Mm-hmm.
My advice for scripting, especially with UEFN, is you have to read the documentation.
Mm.
There's the video for tutorials are very sparse,
Mhm.
and of the ones that there are, they are not they're not necessarily the best way to learn because then you're just copy pasting code
Yeah.
and not really understanding how it's actually working and not looking at the documentation.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mhm.
I had to, in order to develop the systems that I added to my UEFN level, it required a lot of research into the documentation because a
Right.
lot of the things that I wanted to do have not have not been taught in the mainstream, I guess. The information is not widely available.
Right, right. So how do you break out of that tutorial hell? Because a lot of people who get into game scripting struggle with that. They don't have the foundational computer science background like you do. So how do they break out of that mindset of like, I need to be able to solve this on my own rather than relying on copying and pasting from the tutorial?
You don't use the tutorials, period. That is the
Just
best
wouldn't.
way.
That's the best way to
Use
break
the
in.
documentation.
Right. Okay.
That is your best friend.
Hmm.
Despite how confusing and rough it can be. I guess I would say it's better to Google search and look at forums and maybe use Discords and have someone explain to you
Mm-hmm.
how to properly use these things and what these things are properly doing than to watch a video.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. Like for our designers, it's crucial that you guys learn scripting just based on the job search. And Matthew G is a great resource. He's helped me, and Hosias as well has helped me tremendously in learning, like becoming a better programmer. I mean, I'm still a lousy programmer, but like becoming better and having that mindset. So definitely, mentorship is super crucial, and you're accessible to that, right, Matthew G? You'd be happy to help out.
Yeah, of course.
Cool. We've been going on for about 40 minutes. Is there anything else? You guys have any questions? Dylan D, Dylan N.
I guess I could ask, what do you enjoy about scripting, be it verse or just general programming languages?
Um, I guess I would say I like to problem solve. I like to I like to do new things because with programming you never truly know everything ever. Every problem is a new problem to solve.
Hmm. Pretty neat. Do you got a favorite programming language?
Good
Um,
question. Excuse me.
Probably C. because it's just foundational and it's everywhere.
A particular version or like C in general?
Just C proper, yeah.
So I know there's C++, C++, C Sharp.
Yeah, then I will say I'm not a fan of most modern languages,
Hmm.
including verse. But I will still engage with them because that is what is required of the framework.
That's fair enough.
Do you think all those abstractions, now we're getting into like programming talk, but it's definitely fun to talk about. Do you think all those abstractions and like conveniences actually make it more difficult to learn programming as opposed to like, because your favorite language is C, which is stripped down from a lot of like the, memory safety allocation and garbage collection, so on and so forth. Do you think that like it actually makes it more difficult to understand what's happening under the hood?
It depends. I think if you're taking like a regular scripting class, it's definitely going to hinder you the further you get into programming if that is your first language, if it's Python or C sharp or something like that. But if you are a games programmer, I think starting with games programming is not the best route to go because then you have to work with all these libraries
Yeah, it's very
as opposed
complicated.
with something like just using Python, just using C, just using verse or not verse. You have to use a bunch of stuff as well.
Yeah.
But with Python, C, C sharp, all that stuff, you're just using like one library at max, or maybe two or three. And the libraries for game engines are enormous and never ending.
What's your top 3 languages of all time? So we got C as number 1. Let's do 3 other languages that you really like, and you can go into a short detail of why.
That's hard.
I know you've
I
been super
haven't
into Lua.
worked with Lua, but I would
Yeah.
probably list Lua as one of them, even though I've never used it. But
Okay.
I've seen people work in Lua, and
Right.
I've done some preliminary research on the language, and it just seems really great. It's a great first language, especially for kids, which is why Roblox uses it. Or just, I don't love Python, but I do see its convenience. Its writing in that language is 10 times faster than writing in something like C. Getting something done in C would take way longer than getting something done in Python.
Yeah. Okay. And then third? Blueprints?
I don't know if I would necessarily count that as a language.
I know, I'm just kidding.
Let's see. There are other languages I've done, but I'm not really, I guess.
How about C sharp? C sharp's pretty solid.
Yeah, I guess I would say C sharp because C sharp still keeps like declaring types, which I really value. I don't like having to look at code and where it's just like it just assumes the type.
Yeah. It doesn't abstract the type like JavaScript where it's like just var. What is this?
Or Python, or verse.
Okay.
Well, C sharp does have var.
That's
You
right.
can do that if
That's
you
right,
want.
you can. So let's say you're a game designer, right? And you have to learn scripting in order to be able to. I keep driving this point in, but I think it's important. You have to learn scripting in order to do your job, right? Because requiring that on the job posting.
Yeah.
What would you recommend to get up to speed, become like a somewhat proficient programmer / scripter? Would you say go back to the basics, learn C, and just go from there and try to do? Or would you say
No,
okay?
I wouldn't recommend that. If you just want to be like a games and gameplay programmer,
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't recommend that.
Okay.
I would say just do it's extremely boring, but you should do like the bare bones, like C# lessons. There's plenty of them online. There's plenty of resources to do that kind of stuff. I think it's way more valuable than just hopping straight into programming, because it's like you're learning their API while
Right.
you're learning about what a for loop is. You're learning about their
Right.
API while you're learning how to nest statements. And it's just like you're doing two things at once, and I feel like that's probably overwhelming
I think the
for a lot of
biggest
people.
I think the biggest thing that makes it boring is they don't provide a lot of these tutorials. They show you what to do, but they don't provide you with a really fun exercise or activity to do afterwards with the tutorial. They're just like,
Yeah.
it's a 10-part course, but you don't know what to do with those tools that were just provided to you. So I
Yeah.
think finding a good course with exercises is the way to go about doing it, and not looking up the answers.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think
Yeah, the only thing is it's going to be boring no matter what. You're going to be making calculators, you're going to be doing all that kind of lame stuff, and you have to go through that if you want to do the actual fun stuff,
yeah,
because the fun stuff is challenging.
even more challenging?
Yes.
Yeah, because you're dealing with the same problems, but just on a multitude of complexity.
Yes.
Okay, but the thinking still applies, right? Your skill will become better. It's like kind of like in Elden Ring, you become better as a player, even though your gear gets better. But at the same time, you become better as a player, and you tackle the challenge on each
Yeah.
boss or whatever.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Anyone else want to ask Matthew G some questions? Osias? Matthew
I think he's
S.
AFK.
He's muted.
Matthew S. Matthew G. Sorry, Dylan. Dylan N. Dylan D.
I'm good.
I got some good answers.
Cool. All right, guys. I think we can call it. I'll stop the recording.